Okay, so we're going to go on to what makes a good introduction and material and methods. Okay, so what should the introduction contain? Well, sometimes you might think that's the most boring and lengthy part to write, but actually it doesn't need to be very, very long. Again, it has to contain all these essential elements. Number one, it has to introduce and define the topic, give a macro overview of what's happening, then you zoom into the problem and emphasize why this is important. You tell the reader why this problem is important, why it needs to be solved. And then you relate it a bit to current knowledge. You give a few citations, what's been done so far, and then what needs to be done. And then finally, you end off the introduction with your objective. So these are the three components of a good introduction. Just have a look for a moment. Don't worry, I'll pass you the slides again later. Don't have to take down, but just bear in mind again, three things, always thinking of three essential components of introduction. So as I mentioned just now, start the introductions with a short macro overview. And this is one of the titles of my importance of reservoirs for the conservation of freshwater mollusks in a tropical urban landscape. Okay. So start off, what do you mean by starting off your introduction with a very broad perspective or macro overview? So for example, if you're talking about reservoirs, and I was working on reservoirs in Singapore, and I was interested in freshwater mollusks. So I shouldn't begin the introduction talking about freshwater mollusks in Singapore. I should begin talking about the freshwater ecosystems on planet Earth. So you can start off generally with how freshwater ecosystems are doing on planet Earth, how extensive they are, and you can say how they're important. So that should be your first paragraph, right? And then you can then talk about the problems here. Despite the importance, freshwater ecosystems are rapidly being modified or destroyed. See, here's the problem being introduced here. Then you can talk where else the problem being most critical, best striking in tropical Asia. So this is how you start off introduction with a broad overview, global. Sometimes if you can't do a global approach, do a regional approach, and then zoom into your home country. If you're working in ASEAN, for example, you might want to zoom in from a global perspective, what's happening for freshwater ecosystems. Then you zoom into what's happening in Southeast Asia, and then finally you zoom into your home country. And that's how good introduction can be for your paper. And towards the end, the last part of your introduction, always end off with very concise adjectives. And if you sometimes see this word here at the end, this is a very commonly used word to start off your last paragraph, telling the reader that this is your objective paragraph. So it could be, here we present 3 lines of evidence of in this study, in my study, in our study. Again, the difference between in this study, in our study, remember the third person, I would recommend you to use in our study or in my study. We present. You see, I didn't use the third person here, I used the first person. And then a good objective paragraph kind of breaks it down into chunks also for the reader. I say this is my first objective. I use the word first. This is my second objective, and third or finally. So again, you don't always have to type out the words. You can use the number 1, 2, or 3. These are also good ways of breaking down your introductions. So just have a read. This is a good ending for a paper of mine I was writing about where roads are threatening endangered mammals in Southeast Asia. And here, this was my objective paragraph. You can also use numbers like that. You can see this. If sometimes too many numbers, it's not good. Always keep it to 3. Remember the Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, always limits his points to 3 in anything he does. Similarly, when you write, always keep it to 3 things. Okay, so this is just some tips on how to write an introduction. Beyond this is really a lot of experience and practice. I'm not going into details of how the second paragraph should be, how the third paragraph should be. I'm not going into that detail, but again, these are the 3 things that kind of summarizes what you need in the introduction. Okay. Again, everything else comes with practice. Okay, so in the 3-2-1 form, I'm going to ask you what are your biggest challenges to writing an introduction, so that we can discuss it next week. So fill this up again. Okay, it's on to material methods. What should the material methods contain? So material methods should describe the techniques and experimental setup. It also should describe the study and the objective, study object and the site itself, the location of where you're doing it. And just to keep things into perspective, how a material method should be is really like a cookbook. When you imagine you're making a very nice dish, you have a list of steps in your cookbook. Provide specific detail and provide necessary detail enough for you to replicate the dish. So imagine if you're doing a research, imagine yourself like a chef. What are the essential bits of information you need? Similarly, like a cook, you need all these ingredients to replicate your dish. So in science as well, you need to always ensure that you can replicate your findings, replicate your research. So then be specific in terms of what you need the next person to follow in order to get the same exact results. Well, if possible, sometimes you may not get the similar results, you may get identical results, but it's never ever 100% actually the same. So the least you can do is be specific and provide necessary detail. For example, if you wanted to extract the DNA from blowflies, if you're working on molecular research, you need to provide all the important aspects, what the amplicon was used, what kind of PCR you used, two-step PCR, what kind of primers you used, even listing out the actual sequences, what kind of chemicals, what kind of programs you used, how many replicates of PCRs did you do. See, all these allow the next person to replicate, and that's what we need in science. So material methods contain this, but prior to that, let's say if you're working on a particular forest plot in your own country, you need to provide the details of, for example, where the forest plot was, what the weather was like, what season did you do it in, what time of the year, all this kind of information of the locality needs to be in there. Then you talk about your sampling. In this case is kind of similar to what scientists might work on the lab. Your actual work, describe that in the next few paragraphs. And finally, towards the end of your material methods, you can talk a bit about your statistical analysis you used to analyze the data with. That's usually towards the end of the material methods. So the first part is usually, again, as I mentioned, if you're working out there in the field, your location, study site details, then followed by your sampling methods, and then finally round off with the statistical analysis and the kind of analysis you plan to use, including the software. So that's what a good material method should contain. Again, all this is practice. I won't go into details. We'll discuss this further detail next week. But I want you to also write down what are your biggest challenges to writing materials and methods. Fill it up in the 3-2-1 form, and we can discuss it next week. So this is the 3-2-1 form, which I'll pass to you later. And now,
Ruben, I have one question.
go ahead.
Let's say for the material and methods,
Yep.
we have a plot, so it has been meaning that that area has been described before. Is it considered plagiarism if we use the same description of the plot?
It's not considered plagiarism. You're using the same description in the plot, but as far as possible, try to change the words a bit as much as possible. You know, if you can change a few words here and there, please do so, because sometimes if you don't change the words, if you do a plagiarism check, you might get a high score. So just, you know, certain words like the month or the location, of course you can't change it, but you can change certain of the adjectives, the verbs, you know, change a bit, paraphrase a bit, you know, change the sentence structure. That's fine.
Okay, so meaning that if we use the same, let's say the rainfall, the temperature, it's still okay, right?
Yeah, especially if you're using someone else's, it's also good to cite the person's data. So you need to put
Uh,
the person's study there. Okay,
okay,
for example, you studied in the location. Description of the data site can be found in, for example, Mohida et al. For example, you put the person there, and say, if for more details on the site, refer to Mohida et al. That's one way. Then you don't avoid that. But you can mention a bit of what the study site was in the article, but the full description, you can just say, for further details, refer to this article. So then you're covered.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, any more questions on material methods?
Yeah, whenever we actually use any other arithmetical equation, if we write same way the author write, yeah, I think is it considered for plagiarism?
Mathematical equations are okay, so there shouldn't be any issues with plagiarism, because it's hard to paraphrase that or change it. Yeah.
Okay. Just a question regarding like if you are following a certain procedure or protocol in your methodology, and like you're getting like two authors in the same discussed about the same methodologies, and then you sort of like use the same methodology when you do your research. Is it considered plagiarism as well?
No,
But even though you acknowledge them?
as long as you acknowledge them, like this, you say this person, Wilson, 2012, he used this particular method, and you can just put C, this person's method, so that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, so we don't really need to like detail the method in our writing. We
So
just
again, so it's like a cookbook, right? So if I see all this information, is it enough for me to replicate this? Then I say yes. But perhaps, there's some details about the temperature, for example, of this program, or if the PCR was run, all these specific details. If you want to put everything here, you can just say, see this person's material method, see material methods in Wilson 2012. That's also one way. So it depends on your word count also. Let's say you've got so much of information in material methods and it's already too long, you might want to think about condensing it by doing this kind of see this person's work. That's one way to do
okay.
down. But if your material methods are too short, yeah, you can just kind of type out what exactly you did here, but then just make references to them as well. But again, it's about finding the right balance. If you don't want your material methods to be too short and too long, so if it's too long, you can use all these tricks.
Okay. Thank you, Naka.
Okay. So let's say someone wants to look at more details about the primers, for example, you can just put the person's paper there as well. Yeah. It's always good to acknowledge other people's research when it comes to material methods, so you're not seen as plagiarizing.
So true.
Anybody else questions? Okay, before that, I'll jump back. Sorry, the introduction. I should ask questions. Anybody has any questions on the introductions? Oh, very clear. All right. Sorry.
Hello. Yeah. Why is up? Please you.
Regarding the introduction, sometimes like sometimes when it comes to like we get so overwhelmed with the literatures that they put in the introduction that that is some of the things some of the literatures that you put in the introduction that you need to repeat in the methodology. Is that even allowed?
Yep, it's allowed. You can repeat some of the
Okay.
references in the methodology as well. So
Okay.
yeah, good question. I mean, sometimes you might have so much literature to decide where do you start, where do you stop, right? Do you start like from the 1960s, or do you put the more recent articles? This article is written in 2006, I believe. So the recent articles were in 2005, 2002, that's fine. But how far back do we go, right? I mean, 1996, that's okay, 10 years ago. Usually if it involves a new theory, citing someone who developed a new theory or new body of knowledge or describe a new species, of course, it's okay to cite someone back in the 1800s, 1900s. But when it comes to publishing in a good journal, you might want to always restrict it to the most recent publications, the most recent citations as much as possible. Because if someone keeps citing papers in 1980s in a 2006 paper, reviewers might not like it and say, well, this person didn't really do his research or her research. It needs to be citing the more relevant articles. That's something to keep in mind. But again, let's say just to back up one particular statement like this, despite the amount of importance, freshwater ecosystems are rapidly being modified, destroyed. Such a general statement. And then I'm sure you can find 30 over articles you can cite, but please don't cite 30 over articles. Please find, as a rule of thumb, the more recent ones and the more high profile ones, or publications that may contain your name, like self-citation. But don't make it a habit. Don't put everything, all your articles, just for the sake of it. Be sure to always include some of your articles as well, but not specifically or purposely putting a silly statement that doesn't make sense with this whole article just to make sure you're self-cited. So that's also something to be careful about. So recent, high profile, for example, you find a paper in Nature or Science or some important forestry journal, cite it. This one trick. Also, if you are in the field of forestry and you know, for example, your boss has written a paper, don't forget to cite his paper if he's going to be a reviewer. Okay, if your reviewer, for example, is from, let's say you're working in India in your field and you know that in the, I don't know, the WRI or something, there's some big people there who's written a piece of paper. They might be reviewing your paper, so you better make sure that you cite their paper somewhere in your whole manuscript, not necessarily an introduction, but this is one of the tips I will share with you in the future, how to get published. Anyway, this is a sidetrack already, but any more questions on introduction specifically?
Yeah, Ruben, you mentioned that is the current knowledge in introduction section.
Yep.
Is it not actually the similar in discussion section? That means what's done and what's we done and what we have to be done. It is discussion section. It is related.
It can be in discussion section. So it's about finding the balance, right? Let's say introduction, you don't have much to talk about. Suddenly your introduction is so short, it's less than a page. So you might want to put some of the discussion parts inside the introduction. If introduction is too long and you think what needs to be done needs to be in the discussion, the further research ideas, then you put it out in discussion. So it's about finding the right balance. There's no hard and fast rule. So again, it's all about practice and experience. I mean, knowing where to put what.
Okay, yeah. Or another thing that is, if we actually write some research question in introduction section after the objectives. So in some paper we see that they actually mention the research question. So what's thing do you actually describe about this?
Yep. So here clearly the objectives are written in such that's not in the form of a question. So I tend not to write questions put research questions in introduction in a scientific paper. I convert the research questions into the objective, and that's probably what's been a more common practice in these high impact journals. They won't usually ask the research question anywhere in the introduction. That's something that we convert to an objective. If you get what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
We answer your question. Yeah. Thanks. Any more questions on introductions? Okay, if not, we got a few 20 more minutes. Sorry, go ahead.
আবার 2টার সময় কি এক মিটিং দিছে আমি কাজ করে করতেছিলাম
All right, so if I got 20 minutes, I will move on to the bonus section on how to write review papers. I'm sure any of you might be interested to what a review paper will look like. So we've covered what a good abstract is, roughly what a good introduction material method is. We'll see more of that next week, but how to write a review paper is what I'm going to share with you in the second part of this lecture. We still got about 20 minutes. So here we go. All right, so I've showed you how reviews are important for your career. It gets one of the most citations in your research career. So why write reviews? And I've already answered that. It's very important to get citations and get you noticed. So review papers are a quick way. So what's a review paper? It's really a timely update of a major study on a narrow topic. This is what a review paper is what it's about. Sometimes certain topics require an update. Nobody's written anything on it, and what your job is to synthesize, compile all the major studies, the findings from major studies into one piece of review paper. And this topic has to be kind of a narrow topic, cannot be too broad. That's basically what a review paper is. It's how to write review papers. I'm going to show you how. There are 4 steps. Number 1, first of all, you need to get all the papers organized, the data organized. And what you can do, there are a few ways to do it. One, you can use folders. For example, if you're working on a review on fragmentation, you found all the papers related to just the 3 communities. You want to have a folder just on that. Find, print, put all the papers in there. You can also use a virtual folder. It doesn't have to be an actual folder. You're going to save paper these days. Create it in your laptop. So create 1 folder per topic. All right. If you're working on fragmentation, you get 1 topic for wildlife, 1 topic for tree communities, and this is something that will help you organize your subheadings. Again, your folder can be according to your subheading. So put in all the relevant data, notes, relevant articles into these folders. So I'll give you an example. It's my C drive on my computer. This is all my papers. So for example, if I want to work on a review on wildlife trade, I will put all the papers on wildlife trade into 1 folder, and this is how I name them. Again, naming, it's important to name your files systematically. Have the author in front here, as well as the title, and then you should be fine. But if you feel like using software, there's all this free software out there called database software called Mendeley. There's one example. There's EndNotes as well. I'm sure you've used EndNotes before. I've heard of it. But what you do is just put your document inside the software. You automatically detect the authors, the titles, and all that. So it's one way to do it. I personally prefer the old school method, putting in the folders. But if you have access to the software, because sometimes it costs money. For example, this is free for a while, Mendeley, but you need to pay beyond a certain limit. EndNotes require money, and it's sometimes not available to all of us. So what you can do is compare the relevant databases. See, we're going to internet here. Let's see some of the databases online. So these are all the reference software available for cataloging all your papers, and look for the free ones. For example, free software, yes or no, look at the green ones. Cost free, JabRef is one of this. JabRef is one of this reference software that's ultimately free. As you can see, EndNotes is not free. You have to pay $300 for a subscription. But it makes life easier for you, because what it does is allows to insert the citations into your publication as you go along. So some people like that. I personally don't, but again, it's up to you to go. I personally like to write every single reference so that I know how to what papers I'm putting in, because sometimes there are formatting issues, and it can be kind of a pain when it comes to using reference software. Again, it's up to you. Follow your own interests. Don't just listen to what I have to say. But there are reference databases out there to help you catalog your information. But most importantly, as I said, number 1, data organization. That's the most important. And then you can think of a question. what kind of topic you would want to work on. For example, my wife, she works on bats, flying foxes. So she has decided to find out what's happening to flying foxes in globally, what's happening in the world. So again, this is a nice map that she created using a software called Program R. So R is a program software that's used to make this map, and you can do this, use the same. It's free as well, don't need to pay, but it takes a bit of learning. So she's focusing on 2 species of flying foxes in Malaysia, large flying fox and island flying fox, which is what we can find here. And they are very important seed dispersers. As you know, most of you working in forests, please try to keep them safe. And again, if you don't already know by now, there is no evidence that the SARS-CoV virus came from bats. No conclusive evidence. They have been scapegoated. And they are reservoir hosts for viruses, but not the one in question. So please dispel this myth to your friends. They are very important. Seed dispersers, they travel much more than other animals like tapirs or elephants. They fly around. That's why we call them flying gardeners of the forest. They're dispersing seeds and also pollinating flowers. But unfortunately, they're being persecuted by farmers. Farmers don't like them because they think they're feeding a lot of their sweet, delicious fruits. But unfortunately, I think they don't realize you need to give and take when it comes to maintaining your flying gardeners in the forest. So unfortunately, in Malaysia, the flying fox is being hunted, and this is the large flying fox being shot by hunters as they fly abroad. So one possible review topic is, what's the current state of knowledge of flying fox research involving plants and humans? It's an interesting topic. So again, once you collect the data, what you need to do. This is the second phase. You organize it, organize data. Now you're going to collect the data. You can search for articles on databases such as the Web of Science. And what you do is you do a Boolean search. So it involves typing a few specific terms to try to retrieve papers from journal databases. Again, there's ISI, Web of Science, there's Scopus. You can also do it in Google Scholars, up to you. But what my wife did was she looked at identifying 5 major flying fox topics related to plants and humans, which are diet, foraging, ecology, pollination, seed dispersal, and conflict. So these were the 5 sets of papers that wanted to write. And how do you do it? Well, you need to type out a keyword search algorithm. And this is where it comes in. This is the data analysis. Once you type this in, you will get all the relevant papers. I won't go into details. If you want to find out how to do this, I'll share with you in the next few years, but next few weeks, sorry. But you can type out the dates, the years in between which these papers are found. So usually you want to restrict your search to maybe about 20 years, 10 years. If you want, download all the relevant papers and then you start analyzing the data. So the third step of a review paper is analyzing the data. And what you can do is you can generate maps like this. Once you know, for example, how many papers come from where, for example, this is an idea of the distributions of the kind of research, and you can see here that Australia has had 21 type papers on the flying foxes, Thailand only 1, Philippines only 1. So these are the kind of maps or kinds of trends you can generate in the research as a review paper, the geographic distribution of topics across the entire world between a specific period, between a 25-year period. Then you can do graphs like this, right? You can say, oh, 95% of the papers I found were related to the diet. So actually, there's very few studies done on pollination, done by flying foxes, done very few papers on the conflict, very few papers on seed dispersal. Majority has been looked at the diet. So these are some of the ideas you can do by just downloading papers and finding out common trends. And then you can generate maps like this. You can see, okay, where once you zoom in on a particular kind of paper, which is in this case, we're looking at just conflict studies. You can see that Australia, for example, had the most amount of conflict research, followed by India, and not much has been done. So by just looking at the gaps, right, you're able to say in your discussion, further research is needed on conflict of flying foxes in Indonesia, in the Philippines, in Thailand, Vietnam, into China. So these are the kinds of nice analysis you can do just by downloading papers. And presentation makes difference. So how you present your data really, really matters. And it's all about optics. Again, as I mentioned just now, someone asked, what are the most important bits of a paper? Is it the results? Is it the discussion, introduction? For me, it's the graph and tables in your